One soldier put the situation in perspective regarding those who lost their lives due to the lengthy forced marches in the brutally hot weather. In reflecting on the march of June 15th, Sergeant James A. Wright of the 1st Minnesota Infantry wrote, "It was one of the most heartbreaking marches of our experience, and many men wilted in the scorching heat and dust like mown grass. There were many prostrations, men staggering from the ranks and falling as if shot. There were a number of cases of fatal sunstroke and some dying almost as quickly as if struck by a bullet in a vital part."
God.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios,
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we've got, I think, an interesting topic, a special topic, if you will. You know, if you've followed the show long enough, you know that we don't just stick to troop movements on the battlefield and, you know, all of that stuff. I mean, as interesting as that is, that's kind of the thing that gets our attention. But there's so much more that goes into making the battle what it was. And one of those things is weather. And if you've ever visited Gettysburg in July or June or August or during the summer months, you know how hot it can get. But you and I and everybody else have an automobile with air conditioning to escape into, a hotel with a pool to cool off at the end of the day, a restaurant with ice cold beer to go to for dinner with air conditioning inside. None of these things existed for the soldiers who fought here at Gettysburg in 1863. These guys must have stunk from all of the sweating and grime and heat that they endured. And with us today are two guys who have been studying weather, perhaps obsessively, but to our benefit. It's Jeffrey Harding and John Nese. They are here to talk about their latest book, The Weather Gods Curse the Gettysburg Campaign. And they join me via Zoom. Welcome, gentlemen.
Glad to be here.
Great to be here, Matt.
Thank you.
It's great to have you guys. All right, so this is very interesting. I watched your talk from the Foundation's Sacred Trust Talks last year, and I found it so riveting. People might be saying, it's the weather. What the hell's so riveting about the weather? But it's so. I wouldn't care about it if it wasn't surrounding the Battle of Gettysburg, the Gettysburg campaign. It's not just the battle, it's the campaign. And what's fascinating to me, the first thing that really got me, and it always gets me, and I call this modern day arrogance, that they really kept records of the weather beyond temperature and is the sun out or is it cloudy? You know what I mean? You don't think of that, but you guys go into the Smithsonian's weather study program and the Naval Yard and everything. Kind of, if you can, paint a picture of the background of the study of weather in 1863 in the United States.
Yeah, John, take that.
Well, I want to first say, Matt, that I hope one day my students are as riveted to my lecture presentation. I really appreciate that.
Sure.
The state of weather in the United States in the years leading up to the Civil War. The Smithsonian had opened in 1850-ish, and to some extent, there were some weather observers in the U.S. prior to the Smithsonian, but most of those were absorbed more or less under the heading of the Smithsonian during the 1850s. And so pre-Civil War, there was actually, compared to modern day weather networks, there weren't that many, but there were dozens of observers scattered across mainly the eastern United States. And then when the Civil War began, most of the observers in the South stopped observing, or they stopped reporting. But in the North, you still had some observers in places such as Gettysburg and Harrisburg, Washington, D.C., Frederick, Maryland, for example, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, where the records are available. And thanks to a lot of work by Jeff, and I'll let him sort of finish the story, we were able to unearth as much data as we could possibly find to kind of rebuild what was going on during the Gettysburg campaign.
So it's kind of like finding a Nielsen family today. Like they still exist, but not everybody does it because not everybody watches regular TV anymore. Is that kind of the way it was when the South stopped keeping records?
Sure, we'll go with that.
It's probably not apples to apples, but okay. So Jeff, go ahead. How'd you find all this stuff?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate. I started out really, Matt, because as a guide, you're going to get asked about the weather, and I had understood that we had a weather observer in Gettysburg. Didn't know his tie to the Smithsonian at the time. Knew that he, of course, was one of the founding instructors at college, Pennsylvania College. We know as Gettysburg College, and was very good observer. And we knew because of him, for instance, on the third day of the battle, 87 degrees at 2 p.m. Mm-hmm. So I would tell people that's the best we have. Three times a day, Professor Jacobs would observe the weather. But it always ate at me that I couldn't give him more information. And I wanted to go and find his source documents. The best that most people were relying upon was an article in 1885, I believe it was, written by his son, based upon his dad's records, which laid out the weather a couple days before the battle, during the battle, and a couple days after. But I wanted to see the source documents, so started hunting. And fortunately, like I said, was blessed to find it through an individual down at a NOAA location down in Asheville, the NCEI. Boy, you mentioned this to me, Matt. It was so cool to see it in the book. I mean, it put the hair up on my neck. There it is, the real McCoy, right?
Right.
And at that time, I wasn't aware of anyone that had seen these things. Now, it turns out John, being the astute professor that he is, had seen these and done reports based upon them. There was a meteorologist and weather historian, David Ludlam, in the early 1960s, really wrote what I think John would agree, a groundbreaking article analysis of the weather during the battle. And he had seen them, obviously. And Robert K. Crick had seen these because he published the book, Civil War Weather in Virginia. And he wasn't specifically, of course, focusing on Gettysburg. He was looking at weather records from Georgetown, D.C., if you will, and using that to extrapolate for Virginia. Later on, you'll see some in Ken No. That comes a little after when I had originally found these and some others. But bottom line is, there they are. And will it give me more than we already know? And that's when I turned to John, and we always kid because, I made a phone call, and God bless him, he answered it. And here we are, John, almost 10 years later. Yeah. We're still on the subject.
You still have yet to meet each other where the other one lives, right? You refuse to go visit.
No, can't do that. Too far. But I just called to thank him because he had co-authored another book where they talked a little bit about Jacobs. That helped me get started, and I wanted to thank him. And then I said, John, I've got these records. I don't know, one end of the thermometer from another. How about taking a look at this and let me know if there's anything that'll give us heat index? Because that's what I really wanted to get at. What did it really feel like to the soldiers? And so John took a look and he said, Jeff, this is great, and I've seen these and everything, but you need more. You need something. Here comes the curveball. You need wet bulb temperature. And I said, okay, I knew you were going to say that, John. But yeah.
Well, let's slow down a little bit here.
Yeah.
Let's slow down. Back to Matt's original point, which is that there were observers, but there weren't many. The observers that we knew of observed the weather 3 times a day.
Yes.
And they mostly did have more than a thermometer. Matt, they had other instruments, such as a barometer, which measures pressure. Mm-hmm. And they would have wind direction and speed measuring instruments. And one of the great parts of doing this project was there was a special observer in Washington, D.C. at the Naval Observatory, a place where you would expect the measurements to be really good. And they were measuring the weather 8 times a day.
Wow.
And they also had special thermometers at the Naval Observatory that most of the other observers didn't have. And those special thermometers enabled them to know what the highest and lowest temperatures were every day. And as you know, Matt, if you've watched a weather report on television, they always tell you what the high and the low were, and that's important. And
well, let me stop you there, if I may.
yeah,
Why do you need special thermometers to tell you the high and the low? Couldn't one do both as the temperature changes?
well, if you were continuously looking at the thermometer the entire day, you could watch when it reaches its highest level and you could watch when it reaches its lowest level. But these observers were only looking at the thermometers 8 times a day.
Right.
There are special thermometers when the mercury goes up in the tube. There are special thermometers that will capture the highest value and then capture the lowest value, and those are specially made thermometers that not hardly anyone has.
So it like almost records the highest point it hit, and then you can go and see. That is so cool. Oh man. So okay. Well, I don't want to get into
That's the critical thing too, Matt, because Jacobs, he wasn't even doing 8 times a day. He was just doing 3 times a day.
Right.
So to tell somebody 87 degrees in the shade at 2 p.m., that's nice, but how hot did it get?
Well,
and again, what was the heat index?
And you said in the shade at 2 p.m., which that's important too, because
and it's temperatures or shade measurements, and we can get into all this.
But before we do, let John, if you can continue with the instruments that they use, because you guys go into all these things, and it's really interesting.
So, one instrument that Jacobs did not have, that many of the other observers did have, was a special thermometer called a wet bulb thermometer. And I won't get into the details of how it works, but the bottom line is, with that instrument, you can come up with a measure of humidity, how humid it is.
Yeah.
And if you know that and you know the actual air temperature, you can compute the heat index, which is sort of the feels like temperature that blends the heat and the humidity. And that's what Jeff was after. And Jacobs didn't have that thermometer. Why he didn't have it, we don't know. But he didn't have it. So what we did was we found some locations around Gettysburg where the observers had that special thermometer, where you could compute the humidity, and then we used that data to build the picture in Gettysburg.
And like, how far away are we talking? Frederick, Harrisburg?
Well, Harrisburg is about 35 miles from Gettysburg. The naval, Washington, D.C., of course, is much far. I don't have the distance memorized, but
about 70.
About 70. But when the armies were moving north through Virginia to get to Gettysburg, they weren't that far from Washington, D.C. And you can make meteorological arguments about extrapolating certain bits of information based on the overall weather pattern. And I was able to tap into a resource that's available to anyone who wants to use it online. You pay for with your tax dollars from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's a website where you can rebuild weather maps from the past.
Yes.
And so we were able to rebuild some weather maps from that period in 1863 that allowed me to sort of see the big picture of what the weather was doing. So it legitimizes the idea of sort of extrapolating weather data from one location to another, because we know how the weather tends to operate during the summer, and Washington, D.C. is warmer by a few degrees.
Right.
And so you can make some reasonable assumptions, and that's what we did. We blended official weather observations with this reconstruction system where I could draw maps. And then Jeff compiled 450 pages of a Word document filled with quotes from the soldiers and from citizens that told us more about the weather, what they were feeling at the ground. So you blend all this stuff together and you begin to put a story together.
There was a term that you mentioned in the talk called, now I forget what it is, the sun temperature. Is that right? The sun temperature. And this is fascinating, and I'm jumping ahead because this is particularly pertinent, I think, if you're thinking about the men prior to Pickett's charge, and I think you make this point, the Confederates especially, but all of them really, I guess, who are laying down on the ground. What is sun temperature? And I've never heard of this before, but I'm fascinated by this idea. And it's true, I've noticed in the summer when I've laid down on the ground, it seems hotter than when I'm standing up. So go ahead. Tell us what sun temperature is.
Well, I'll give you this one quickly. I want to make sure Jeff has a chance because he always provides the perspective that I don't. But yeah. The observers at the Naval Observatory also had a special thermometer out in the sun. Okay. Official temperature measurements, as Jeff pointed out earlier, are taken in the shade. Well, they were smart enough to put a thermometer in the sun about a couple inches above the ground. Mm-hmm. And so, as you've noted, Matt, the temperature right down near the ground on a sunny day can be much higher. I like to tell my students, the temperature at your toes is much higher than the temperature at your nose on a sunny day.
Yes.
And so we didn't use those measurements very often, but the one time we mentioned it in our talk.
At Digital History Pioneers Foundation, we are about grassroots history on digital platforms. That means we are about podcasters, documentarians, YouTubers, and even TikTokers. All of these creators are out there trying to share their love of history with the public. They don't need ideas, they need funding, both from viewers and corporate donors. DH Pioneers' initial funding focus is on the Civil War era, with a special emphasis on the Addressing Gettysburg podcast. So be a vital part of the unique content Addressing Gettysburg has in store by donating at dhpioneers.com and help bring your love of history to the people. Digital History Pioneers is an IRS Section 501c3 approved charitable corporation that makes any donation tax deductible to the fullest extent of the law.
I remember it distinctly. We got some oohs and ahs from the audience when we presented our results, because it turns out that on the afternoon of July 3rd, while those Confederate soldiers that you mentioned, Matt, were laying out in the sun, literally laying on the ground, it turned out that the sunshine conditions in Washington and the sunshine conditions in Gettysburg were just about the same, and the actual air temperature at both places was about the same. So we kind of argued that you could extrapolate the number from Washington to Gettysburg at that particular time. And Jeff will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the sun temperature at that time was in the 130s. And we sort of presented that as a reasonable guess at what those soldiers might have felt laying in the sun on July 3rd, the afternoon.
So it's no wonder, Jeff, then, that a lot of those guys, when it was time to get on their feet, didn't. It wasn't shell fragments that kept them down. It was heat.
Yeah. Well, there was both, of course, Matt, but they expressly talked about that in their writing. They talked about the guys that were falling out with heat stroke before even time to make the charge. And, the guys across the way, except for the ones in Ziegler's Grove, the Union troops, they're out in the sun.
Yeah.
Pickets, except for maybe the 57th Virginia. They're at the point of the woods there a little bit. They got a little shade, Heath, however you want to say it. But Trimble's guys are out in the sun. So most of these guys are out in the sun, and they're taking a beating. They're there for a while, and these guys are, been on the move for a couple days. Pickett's division got there the evening before, but they had a hard march that day. They're already exhausted. And now they got to do this. So it plays a role, and it gives historians something else to discuss as far as how things turned out, I think.
I was always under the impression that for the most part, the 3 days of the Battle of Gettysburg were cloudy to overcast, but not like a bright, clear, sunny day, except maybe for a few hours here and there or a few spots. Am I right in that?
Well, there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, because John and I got into this, sort of getting down to the nitty gritty on July 2nd, because in the book, we talk about the 6th Corps marching in. We also talk about Law's Brigade marching in and what were those conditions like. And it's much worse than anyone's ever thought in terms of the heat index. But there were some clouds that day. And I remember distinctly saying to John, the clouds we're looking at there, is that the kind of clouds that would have really been significant enough? And Jacobs has a rating of how cloudy it was.
Right.
Numerical, I believe it is, John, right? But and he also mentions the type of cloud. So the type of cloud matters.
Yes.
And we looked at whether or not this would filter much sunlight out. And so as it turns out, on July 2nd, those clouds that afternoon are letting quite a bit of that sunlight through. And remember, at that time of year, we're close to the summer solstice. So that intensity of the rays that time of year can't be much stronger. And so, again, you get into circumstances where now you got to kind of look at all this and start to discuss what happened and how might it have made a difference or not. It's up to historians to banter that about, and they'll never resolve it completely. But we've given them something they've never had before. And I'll tell you, this naval observatory data was a true gold mine because no one, to our knowledge, has ever used it. And I think that's because, Matt, it's not part of the same collection that the Smithsonian records were in. It's separate, but it was in the collection I was using vis-a-vis the NOAA organization I mentioned earlier. So we were the first ones to bring this to the fore and have things like this. So it's a big difference.
And Matt, just to sort of summarize, during the 3 days of the battle, I'm looking at Jacobs's observations right now. The first day of the battle was largely cloudy.
Yeah.
The second day of the battle, the sun poked out a little bit.
Okay.
And on July 3rd, in the afternoon at 2:00, Jacobs observed 40% cloud cover. So of the 3 days, the sun was out the most on the third day. But as Jeff pointed out, Jacobs also includes information about what type of cloud was up there. And it can be challenging to know exactly what the sky looked like, but this is where the soldiers talk to us. We know that on that second day, some of them started mentioning seeing the sun. And we know on the third day, more of them mentioned the sun. I think what our work brings to the fore is by throwing in the humidity component. That's important here because our results show that by modern standards, all 3 days were pretty humid in Gettysburg.
Right.
They weren't necessarily hot by temperature standards, but those days you wake up in the morning, you walk outside, and even though it's not hot, you're like, ew.
Ugh. Yeah.
You want to go back inside.
Right.
And all 3 days were of that ilk in Gettysburg. So they may not have been hot, but they were uncomfortable. And it didn't get chilly at night. I mean, Jacobs' observations for that 3-day period, the temperature really didn't go below 70 degrees at night. Now, of course, he was only measuring, he reported at 7 a.m., so it could have snuck below 70 before that, but the nights were not comfortable either.
Right.
And that's why Jeff says on that second day, it was actually much more uncomfortable than people knew before because we were able to introduce the humidity component to the story.
Yeah. And then we make the point a number of times, Matt, so people remember this. As I said, temperature is a shade measurement, right?
Yeah.
So you step out in the sun, they can quantify this. NOAA has said 10 to 15 degrees warmer in the sun. You know this, you go to the beach, who's hanging out under the umbrella, having a sarsaparilla. It's a little cooler than when you jump out and walk down to the water's edge. Of course, then it gets cooler by the water, at least where I live. But anyway, shade measurement. So just always important to remember that. If we're telling you on the third day of the battle, the temperature is 87.2, but then we looked at the high temperature, we calculated the range of the heat index, somewhere between 98 and 105. That's a shade measurement. You're going to tack on another 10 to 15 degrees on the third day of the battle that afternoon. So what are you really looking at? I mean, it's scary at some point. And of course, it's much worse than this earlier in the campaign. And we kind of, I don't want to say stumbled onto this, but as we were conducting our analysis and began to look at this heat wave that hit in June, boy, that was really something.
Yeah. So, okay, go back to that heat wave in June. Because they're on the march in June. They're all moving around and they're all,
Absolutely.
zigzagging all over the place on dusty roads. How does the heat? I noticed this, driving home. It's winter. The atmosphere is cold, like temperature wise, but color wise too. Everything is blue, right? Summer, it's pink, it's green, you got all these warm colors, and the evenings are great. All day long in the winter, it's just this cold, miserable, depressing blue, right? But I notice when there's atmosphere, some kind of mist or haze off in the mountains or whatever, that too is bluish or whatever, but the colors change and everything. How does temperature affect visibility and, atmosphere, like low light, like hugging the ground type atmosphere, fog, mist, things like that? And like heat waves coming off the ground, does that do anything for visibility for an army that's, looking out a few miles across a valley or something like that? Does that distort things in any way?
That was a lot.
I know. I sometimes just spew stuff out and hope you get something out of it.
Well, as a general rule, the warmer it gets, in general, the more invisible water molecules you have in the air, water vapor.
Sure.
And that can reduce visibility as a general rule. So the really crisp days, the ones that you describe with the blue sky and you can see forever, those generally occur during the winter in the eastern part of the United States. In the West, where, if you're in the interior western United States, that can even happen in the summer. You can see forever. But in general, in the East, the sky gets a little murkier as you get into the warmer months. And that's simply because of water vapor in the air.
Okay. So, it's not enough to make a huge difference. Okay. So where were we we were talking with the clouds, right? I think that's where we left off before.
Yeah, a little bit of the heat wave in June. Did you want to know more about
the heat wave? That was it. Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it was interesting as we began to look at the data. And Matt, as this book evolved, it grew. And it grew because initially my goal was to sort of have a Busey and Martin, if you will, of the weather during the campaign. Mm-hmm. So, where do you go for your stats on the troops? Busey and Martin. Where do you go for the weather? We didn't have that. But boy, it turned out to be a lot more because we began to fold in the stories, et cetera, et cetera. But as we examined this data each day, things started coming to the fore. And when we started looking at the heat indices for this period in June, when it happened to be that the troops are on a hard march, and there were periods, that ebbed and flowed, but these guys are on a hard march, 15, 20, 25 miles a day. And we're looking at heat indices for a few days in a row, 115, 117. And as I talked to John, and we're back and forth on this, John's, let me look at the historical data and see how this relates. I'll let John pick it up there.
Well, during the time of the heat wave, we're speaking about June 15th to 18th, 1863. The armies are not that far from Washington, D.C. And so we made the assumption, again, after looking at some reconstructed weather maps, that it's reasonable to look at the numbers from Washington, D.C. and extrapolate them to the vicinity of the armies. And to cut to the chase, the humidity levels combined with the heat during that 4-day period were, I looked at modern data from both National Airport in downtown Washington and Dulles, which is less affected by the urbanization of Washington, D.C.
Right.
I looked at these modern day data and just asked a simple question. How often in the last 60 years, for example, has the heat index at one of those airports reached the levels that we think it could have reached in June of 1863? And the answer came back almost never. That the heat indices we calculated or estimated in June of 1863 were very unusual. And just looking at the temperature in that 4-day period in Washington, D.C. reached at least 93 degrees 4 straight days. So you can ask a simple question. How often does the temperature reach 93 degrees 4 days in a row in modern day Washington, D.C.? Mm-hmm. The answer comes back very rarely. So no matter how you slice it, the things that the soldiers were saying about that period, and Jeff had these amazing quotes that he found of things that the soldiers were saying. I think we can look at the data and say, I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah.
This is legit.
So you mentioned Dulles, and how much of a difference does pavement make in perceived temperature or actual temperature or whatever it is? Like, we're walking around Gettysburg, the town, and it's all pavement, and so you get stuck out in the middle. I used to work in the middle of a parking lot. We had a shed. Our bike, you remember, Jeff, you stopped by and said hi. We had a shed and a bicycle tour company, and we were in the parking lot at the visitor center here. And on a really hot summer day, it felt like 20 degrees hotter than what the thermometer said it was, because we were getting it from above and we were getting it from below. Baking out there, frying on that parking lot. But how much of a difference does that make? Like, would it have made?
Well, let me just, you're absolutely right in your observations. But I want to be clear that the placement of the thermometers at these locations is done in a way to absolutely minimize that effect. So the numbers that I'm looking at, you might say, well, it's an airport. It's paved in asphalt. Well, the placement of the thermometers is done in a way to minimize that.
Sure. Okay.
So the point being, the data.
I was actually asking more for like the human perception of what temperature, but that's a good
right. Well,
point.
Your human perception is spot on. Spot on.
As I often claim that my human perception is spot on. Okay, so it is true. I mean, it's obvious. So back then, though, I mean, I guess, well, like, what are we talking? 10, 15, 20 degrees difference today with the blacktop? Or do we not know? Or do we not care?
Hey, buddy. What's got you so down?
Hey, Court. I'm looking for a gift, but I just don't know what to get my Gettys nerd friends and family.
It sounds like we need to have a talk. Come on. You love this place, don't you?
You bet I do. It's my favorite place in the world.
Well, you see, at Addressing Gettysburg, it's our mission to keep these stories alive.
How do we do that?
I'm glad you asked, sport. You see, Gettysburg is the gateway to the most brutal and crucial time in American history, so we interview experts, and our listeners learn with us.
That sounds amazing.
It is! Mike, are you f***ing serious?
What? It's for the commercial. What benefits do patrons get?
You mean besides up to 4 premium episodes per month and Matt being the bee's knees as host? Huh. How about early access to special episodes, behind-the-scenes insights, and discounts for ticketed events?
Whoa! None of the other history channels I follow do that for their listeners.
That's because Addressing Gettysburg doesn't take its listeners for granted and really cares about us learning American history.
You know, I should gift my Gettys nerd friends and family an Addressing Gettysburg Patreon membership.
You see, the answer was right under your nose the entire time.
Make Addressing Gettysburg's Patreon a gift for the Gettys nerd in your family this holiday season. Addressing Gettysburg wants you to learn about the Civil War with us, and we need your support. We'll run this ad until it gets annoying, and then we'll run it until you become a patron at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Happy holidays.
The hell are we staring at?
No idea.
I don't know. I mean, my understanding at that time is the surfaces that these soldiers would be on were mostly dirt.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
I mean, there's no asphalt.
No.
There's no
blacktop. There's no
macadamized roads, the turnpikes, but by and large, these guys, especially at that time that we're talking about.
But those would be those were light colored though, right?
Yeah.
So that'd be reflecting the sun, theoretically. Okay, it's just a curiosity. We don't have to get into that if we don't really have the whatever to do it. Okay,
That's in that'll be in the follow-up book, Gary.
The macadamized roads and how they made the heat horrible in the Civil War.
Believe me, we had to cut.
You know what? I think another way to say this, Matt, and I think Jeff would agree with me, is that when you list the factors that were affecting the way these soldiers felt, lack of water, lack of proper sleep, lack of proper nutrition, are probably way up there. The fact that they're wearing, some of them, wool, are much more important factors in terms of how the soldiers felt than the things you may be getting at here.
Yeah, I'm really not. I figured while I have you here, I might as well ask all these questions that I've wondered. I'm just trying to get it all in. But you mentioned all those other factors there, and that's the thing that amazes me. And I bring it up often when we have episodes like this where we talk about these kind of off topic but very important topics or subjects. And that's the human side of it all. And, we walk around in these moisture wicking short sleeve t-shirts and shorts and everything, and we're still dying of heat, and we're sweating and we're complaining, and we can't wait to get into the air conditioning. These guys didn't have any of that relief unless they were allowed to go skinny dipping in a creek or something like that, right? But for the most part, they've got to live with all this stuff, and they're not eating the way they should be. They're probably not hydrating as best as they should, and they probably have diarrhea, so they're dehydrating as faster than they're hydrating. All of this stuff going in there, and this is why it's 18-year-olds that fight wars, because we couldn't handle this. Anybody over 35 wouldn't be able to handle this. Like, we'd all drop out, right? Yeah. But it's just amazing that all of these elements. Have you read An Environmental History of the Civil War? Timothy Silver and Judkin Browning?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, there you go. I found that to be fascinating. That was probably one of the first books I read that wasn't about the actual combat, that kind of opened my eyes to, this isn't a movie, right? This is real life. And all of the things that affect our lives today, bacteria, all that, weather, starvation, hydration, affected these guys back then. And then that, coupling that with what you guys have done now, it is making a flat, faded color picture that I have of the war in my head into this 3D, 360 degree, like modern day video game type of thing. Like it's making a world that previous history really didn't give us. So do you want to comment on the wonderful job that you're doing here with that?
Well, no, I think that's nice of you to say, and a great way to put it. I hadn't heard it put that way, actually, Matt. But I mean, I give the credit to certainly John for the science piece of it, and to the soldiers. And these quotes are just a huge gift to all of us as historians, because they're so rich in their commentary and their descriptions of it. And they really give it the color. I mean, I don't want to get into reading a bunch of them here, but I would just tell anybody who buys this book, I tried to blend together as many of those as I could with what we wrote. The way the book's organized, will give you the status of what's going on with the troops at that time, a little background on what's happening on the weather, and it's broken down week by week. And then we'll talk about the primary sources we're applying to any particular section. And then we get into some focus pieces on, what's going on right now of particular interest where the weather's playing a role. And that's where we unfold these quotes. And John blends some in, I blend them in, and then we even have certain stories in there, like the Medal of Honor that was awarded to a soldier for rescuing, if you will, one of his compatriots in the Orange Blossoms, 124th New York. He's left behind to take care of the officer who had fallen out with heat stroke. And they're surrounded by some Confederate scouts, if you will. Most of the main army's moving on, but there's a threat to these guys, and it's not looking good. And that's when the officer tells the soldier, Nathan Mullikallick, he says, "Get out of here. This isn't your fight. You don't have to stay." And he says, "No." He says, This is my job. I was sent here to stay with you and help you. He says, we may go to prison, we may be killed, but I'm not leaving. And I mean, that's the real deal. And it all happened because of the weather.
Yeah.
Because the guys are falling out in droves. Matt, if you look at the medical surgical history of the War of the Rebellion, at that period of time, June of 1863, of all the reported cases of sunstroke, the Army of the Potomac reports 80% of them. This is every army in existence for the Union. 80% of the cases of sunstroke are reported by the Army of the Potomac. They represent roughly 40% of those armies.
Wow.
Yeah.
So almost
that tells
half.
you what they were doing.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's something. It's kind of a showstopper.
You mentioned you mentioned quotes. Give me a couple of them, though, just to give people an idea of, like, you got any favorites that kind of stand out that you can rattle off real quick?
Gosh, yeah. Got favorites that probably didn't make the book either, but I'll give you a couple here, man.
Okay.
Let's see here. There's that was Lieutenant Lewis Wisner, by the way, with Nathan Mullicalif. Let's see. One soldier put the situation in perspective regarding those who lost their lives due to the lengthy forced marches into brutally hot weather. And reflecting on the march of June 15th, Sergeant James A. Wright of the 1st Minnesota Infantry wrote, "It was one of the most heartbreaking marches of our experience, and many men wilted in the scorching heat and dust like mown grass. There were many prostrations, men staggering from the ranks and falling as if shot. There were a number of cases of fatal sunstroke and some dying almost as quickly as if struck by a bullet in a vital part."
God.
James Wright left us some amazing quotes. And, the Confederates do as well. See if I can find something else for you here.
That's just so hard to imagine. Like, when you juxtapose that description to, like, the movie, for example, Gettysburg, and, pickets arriving on the field, the Longstreet's arriving on the field or whatever, and there's troops marching in the background, and everybody's just, straight backed, and nobody looks tired, nobody's drenched in sweat, it's just, everything is perfect as the way it's supposed to be, and everybody's happy and cheerful and hello, General, and but when you read that, it just sounds like tragedy and misery around every corner. Like, there is just, and of course they had to have found, moments of, like jovial moments and frivolous moments and things like that. You've got to, of course.
Sure.
But they find those moments amidst that stuff. People just dropping out as if they were shot. And it's from the heat.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah. It's so hard to imagine that. It's just such a horrible thing. John, you're a science guy, and this is what I love about the way things are being done today. You got a history guy, you got a science guy. They come together to do this book, blending the two in. Did you have an interest in the Civil War prior to Jeff getting in touch with you?
Well, when I was at the Weather Channel, I did a little feature every day about some aspect of the weather that I found interesting, and that was the first time I did anything that had to do with the overlap of weather and the battle. I mean, my father had taken me to Gettysburg. He was a high school history teacher when I was 9. I had not been back to Gettysburg since then. But then when I moved back to Pennsylvania, Gettysburg's kind of in my backyard. I'm working for Penn State.
Right.
And so when Jeff called, I had a passing interest in what was happening in Gettysburg. I didn't know it would take us on this journey. I'm sure glad that it did. But it didn't just come out of the blue. I had been interested in the history of weather. As Jeff alluded to earlier, I had co-written a book called the Philadelphia Area Weather Book with a Philadelphia television meteorologist about 25 years ago. And I was working at the Franklin Institute Science Museum at the time. And long story short, the Franklin Institute has a long history of being involved in the weather. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Philadelphia was kind of the hotbed of American meteorology for the first half of the 19th century. And so I was kind of into the historical part of it. And I knew that there was a weather observer in Gettysburg in Adams County, just like there was a weather observer in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and a weather observer in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. So I was working on the periphery of Gettysburg, but nothing like Jeff's focus.
So you were kind of interested in just the history of weather. Would that be fair?
Yes, that would be fair. And the overlap of weather with historical events.
Okay. That's so interesting. I never would have thought of that until you guys.
I mean, I've done pieces for Pennsylvania Public Television on the weather of the original Independence Day, the weather in the Challenger disaster, the weather in the Super Bowl. You know, you name an important historical event, I've probably done a feature for Pennsylvania Public Television on that intersection. That really fascinates me.
That's so cool. I love that is something that fascinates you. Because if it didn't fascinate you, and I'm sure other scientists such as yourself, none of us would know anything about it, right? It has to fascinate somebody to make them start digging.
Well, and you know, the overlap of weather with important history such as D-Day is a well-known story.
Yeah.
I wasn't the first to tell it, but it's a fascinating story as just one example of how, you know, when the war was over and I'm probably going to botch this quote, but Eisenhower is on record as saying that D-Day succeeded because we had better meteorologists than the Germans did.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, things like that really bring it home.
Stagg, wasn't it? Stagg, was that his name? Stagg. I think he's the guy that's reporting to Ike, and he's telling him it's going to clear up tomorrow, and it's like 4 a.m, and wherever Ike is, the windows are rattling, it's pouring down rain.
It's well known that D-Day was postponed a day because of the weather.
Because of the weather, sure.
It's huge.
So in the time of the Civil War, though, they weren't trying to predict weather, or were they? By studying the weather, what was their purpose? Just to get patterns, or what?
Well, there was really no prediction going on. There was no National Weather Service. So to my knowledge, the state of weather prediction at that time was essentially zero. There was some knowledge, reading the clouds, you know, a ring around the sun or moon means rain or snow is coming soon. There were some folklores.
Yeah.
There were rudimentary attempts, even as early as the 1830s, to try to draw weather maps by piecing together just the sparse data that you had. But once the Civil War intervened, there was none of that going on. No one was drawing weather maps. But weather observers, we are a dedicated bunch, Matt. And once you get it in your blood that I've been doing this for a couple years, and I imagine Jacobs was like that. He's a college professor. He loves the environment. He's been observing weather for many years. Heck, I'm going to keep doing it.
Right.
And I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do. And somewhere down the line, somebody's going to find this data useful.
Yeah. Okay. So it's basically for the record, right? Like, because they're not, like, predicting isn't a thing. Somebody has a question here, and this is something I think we should get back to, because there's two things I want to get to, but let's start with humidity. First thing we want to know is, this is from Cheatham Hill. They ask, what are their thoughts, meaning yours, on the humidity level versus actual temperature? Obviously no heat index then, but did it add to it? May have mentioned it already, so apologies if so. You kind of did mention it, but you didn't go into it here like you did obviously in the book and in the Sacred Trust talk that I watched. So can you go into that a little bit? You mentioned that it wasn't recorded here in Gettysburg, but it was recorded elsewhere. And then I think I took us on a tangent and we never got back.
Well,
suffocate?
That's another great question.
With respect to the battle, we used humidity data measured in Harrisburg, 35 miles up the road, extrapolated that data to Gettysburg with the justification that the weather regime that was in place in the mid-Atlantic during the 3 days of the battle would have made the feel-like temperature in Harrisburg pretty much the same as that in Gettysburg.
Right.
I think the way we write it in the book is that it would have felt the same had the battle been fought in Harrisburg as it was fought in Gettysburg. And we make a reasonable argument based on the reconstruction maps that those two localities, only 35 miles apart, were in the same weather pattern.
Yeah, and I believe that because I've been here and then had to jump up to Harrisburg and there was no damn difference. But I have been, one time we went to Antietam, okay, and it was 70 degrees. No, sorry. It was 70 degrees when we left Gettysburg. Went over the mountains down to Antietam. Next thing you know, it's 40 degrees and it snowed. And then we came back over the mountains through the snow and we come down the mountain and it's 70 degrees again here. It was like April or March or something like that.
Exactly. And had the battle been fought in other months where the weather is more changeable over short distances, I think Jeff and I would have had a much more difficult time with some of the assumptions that we made.
Yeah.
But in the middle of summer, early July, it's not at all unusual, as you said, Matt. You drive from Gettysburg to Harrisburg, you get out of the car, it feels the same.
Yeah.
And I think we were able to establish, and of course, rain can make a difference too. If it rained in Harrisburg and didn't rain in Gettysburg, that can make a difference, but that wasn't happening on those first 3 days of July.
Well, so that's the next question that I was going to get to, was one of the people asked the rains that came on the 4th and 5th. How did that affect anything? Did it cool everything down or did it add to the humidity?
It cooled everything down.
Yeah. But you're touching on something there that hopefully who's ever asking on that, and maybe some other folks as well, are going to be curious about. And I always was, with the rainfall that Jacobs recorded, seemed to not jive, if you will, with Imboden's account of the torrential rains as they went through the mountains on the retreat. What would you have expected the rain to have been to create the situation on the Potomac where they couldn't cross when they ultimately they're stuck there for nearly a week, right?
Right.
So, and interesting, talking about these different observers, we found there was a Smithsonian observer of all places just outside of Hagerstown in Leitersburg and got all excited. And turned out he was one that no longer reported at the time of the battle. So there we were that close, still looking for his records, though, because we have evidence that he was still keeping on his own weather data. We have a newspaper article that explains that he is comparing the precip in 1863 with 62. How could he do that if he wasn't still keeping track?
Sure.
So I checked every possible source and then some. But we have not located those. Would love to find them. There was a weather observer in Chambersburg. So these are over on the other side of the mountain.
Yeah, sure.
So
it was snowing over
that
there.
would have been great. Neither one of us gave us what we needed. So we had to get into some, what John and I like to say, and it really is reverse engineering, to look at what likely happened. The rainfall's a different animal, and John did a great job of drumming this home with me. We look at the temperature things, but to say what the rainfall was in Gettysburg, what it was on the other side of the mountains, and there could be great differences, could not be. It's extremely variable, and we got our arms around it, though, I think in a unique way to give people a better feel for what the circumstances were, at least to some point, to create that situation on the river that bottled Lee up for a while and proved to be kind of a harrowing circumstance. Right, John?
Yeah, and I mean, Matt, you probably have the experience of I remember when I used to play softball. Softball field's 10 miles from my house. It's July. It never rains at my house, but the game is canceled. Why is the game canceled?
Yes.
Because there was a thunderstorm at the field and it's a quagmire, right?
Sure.
So you know how the precipitation can work during the summer.
Yeah.
We meteorologists say that summertime precipitation is more convective, which simply means here, there, but not everywhere.
Right.
It's more thunderstorm.
Yeah.
And so we have some numbers about how much rain fell during the retreat. We have a number from Gettysburg, as Jeff pointed out. We have some numbers from Harrisburg, which suggest that it rained a heck of a lot more than it did in Gettysburg. And so, but we don't know how much it rained south and west of Gettysburg as Lee's army retreated toward Hagerstown to try to cross. So what we did is as Jeff said, we reversed engineered it. We sort of have an idea of the level of the river that prevented Lee from crossing. So we have some idea of what the river level was in that first and second week of July 1863 after all the rain fell.
First-hand accounts.
Right. So we asked the question, let's look at some modern day times during the summer when the river rose to a level comparable to what we think it was in July of 1863 that prevented Lee from crossing. And if we can find those comparables, let's just ask, well, how much rain did it take in the river basin that feeds the Potomac to produce these modern day similar river crests? So we did that. And I found 3 proxies, 3 comparables. And it turns out that a reasonable guess for how much rain it takes in the basin that feeds the Potomac at Hagerstown is between 3 and 4 inches. You were able to create modern day rises on the river comparable to what happened in July. Okay. And so that's what we wrote, that this is, as far as we know, the first scientifically sound guess at how much rain would have had to fall to make the river do what it did.
And the I guess the epilogue to that too, Matt, is that again we started looking at this and going, okay, this is early to mid-July 1863, that much rainfall creating these conditions on the Potomac. I go back to John. John, how often has this happened? Can we take a look at some historical data? Was this unusual? Because we got the unusual heat wave. We got it pretty darn bad, especially on July 2nd and 3rd in Gettysburg. So the weather gods are playing some tricks on things here. How about with this rainfall? What did we find, John?
Well, it turns out that we do have modern day river level data from Hagerstown. And at least in the last 30 years.
Yeah, right at Williamsport too, right, John?
At Williamsport, at Williamsport, where they crossed. It turns out in the last 30 years, the river level at Williamsport had never come close to rising as high in July in the last 30 years as it did in that July.
Okay.
So it at least based on modern record keeping, it's pretty unusual for the river to be that high in the month of July at Williamsport.
Well, okay. So what, 2 questions. Let me start with this one. So the weather patterns, Jeff, you being a guide out here, to John's point about, it's not raining at my house, but softball was canceled because the field's a quagmire. You, I'm sure, have been out on a tour on the battlefield, say at Little Round Top, and you see this black, deep purple wall of cloud coming over the mountains, and it misses you entirely, but it shits on the town, right? And it just goes up north of town and everything like that, and other places, right? You could be anywhere. You could be in town and you can see the like we had that tornado that tore down the trees on Big Round Top a few years back, right? And I was in town taking a nap and missed the whole damn thing. I was so pissed because I was out in the sun the whole time. I'm like, well, we don't have anything to do till 5, so let me go take a little afternoon nap and get out of the heat. And then I missed the excitement of the whole day. Yeah. Anyway, point is, so yeah, you're right. In the summertime, they're sporadic and you can watch them while getting a tan, right? Winter, it's just a blanket of hell over you, right? And if it's snow or rain, it's fallen over the whole region. But so when you're trying to figure out where rain fell way back then, right? And you don't have reports everywhere. Can you? I'm assuming in 160 years the weather patterns haven't changed, right? Like working outside doing the bike tours for all those years, I learned like in the summertime, our weather comes from like the west and the southwest, basically. And but winter it's different. And I'm not out in the winter. I'm avoiding it, so I don't really give a shit what it is in the wintertime, where it comes from in the winter. But like this recent thing seems to have come from the north, the stuff that we're in now. So, do they change in 160 years that drastically or no?
The general weather patterns that you just described, the short answer is no.
Okay. So can you go back then and go, okay, well, if the weather comes from this, and can you trace like where they are saying they got rain, and then figure, but then I guess the question is it a small pocket of rain, or is it like a blanket of rain over the whole region?
Well, the way the data that we have from Harrisburg, Washington, Gettysburg, Frederick, shows us during the retreat, the rain amounts varied considerably.
Okay.
And which is not unusual in the summer.
Right.
I mean, the reconstruction system that I referenced earlier that allows us to draw weather maps doesn't give us the specifics of exactly where it rained. But what it gives us is the big picture. Like anyone who's ever watched a weather map knows we meteorologists are fascinated with areas of high pressure and low pressure,
right,
and warm fronts and cold fronts. These are terms that I think many people are familiar with.
And bomb cyclones.
And that's a difference. But this reconstruction system kind of gives us the gross characteristics. And in a nutshell, it suggests that during the retreat, well, and let me just back up 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Cold fronts are things that we meteorologists are fascinated with. They're blue lines on weather maps. And when they come through, they often bring rain or snow, and then it turns colder behind them. During the summer, these cold fronts come into Pennsylvania, and maybe it chills down a little bit up in Erie or Detroit or Buffalo, but then that cold air gets to the Mason-Dixon line and it kind of stalls. And so when that happens, there can be corridors where precipitation is favored for many days. And the way the weather maps make it look is that one of these cold fronts kind of stalled along the Mason-Dixon line, and that allowed thunderstorms to kind of roll along it, and it rains, then it stops, then it rains again, and then it stops. And that's the way the weather pattern post-battle kind of looks in the vicinity of where the armies were. We don't have the details, the hour-by-hour details, but we kind of have the gross features.
Gotcha. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, Jeff.
And then we have the quotes, of course, we come right back to.
That's right.
These guys are telling you, they're giving you the ground truth as much as you can trust them, and there are a lot of them giving it to you.
It rained on the 4th and the 5th. Didn't rain as much on the 6th and the 7th.
Yeah.
Then it rained a heck of a lot on the 8th. Everybody complained about the 8th. And then the rains kind of shut off. The river went down. You wait a few days, and what happens? Lee crosses.
You cross.
Yeah. And on his heels, more rain.
Well, so give us a couple of quotes about rain during the retreat, because for the people that haven't read much about the retreat or whatever, it is just so hard to imagine. Now you gotta mix into this. You got your wounded in the wagon train there, and all this misery. And you're the Confederates. You're trying to get away. You don't want to get caught. And you're the Union, you're after them. So you're chasing after these guys in this rain. It's not easy to go. I go up through Monterey Pass to go to Walmart nowadays since we moved out that way. And it's paved, but when it's raining or snowing, it ain't easy. Even when it's paved and you got plows and everything. So these guys don't have paved roads.
Shout out to those guys in that museum out there, by the way. That's a nice jewel out there.
Yeah.
They did a great job.
Yep.
I'm looking for Embod's quote. I mean, that's the classic.
Yes.
And that's just, but I want to give you a couple, because I think everybody should be familiar with that one. But the ones that struck me were when they're crossing the Potomac.
Okay.
Because everybody thinks, well, the rain abated and they got on the cross and it wasn't too bad. But let me switch glasses here. Make sure I can read this thing. So we kind of end the book with some quotes. We figured that was fitting. And by the way, we don't get a chance to talk about this. I mean, one of the things we're, I guess, I hate to say proud of, but most excited to bring to people are some of the images in the book, Matt. There's an image of the bridge crossing at Williamsport, the C&O Canal. And there's been some debate over whether that's Falling Waters or whether it's Williamsport. We believe Williamsport, and we kind of make a case for that there with some other picture. We got drawings from all the guys that, Forbes and Woad, and there's a lot of great imagery in this book. And of course, John Heiser did our maps. Dale Gallen created some original drawings for us. So, and we've got a color section there with John's amazing weather maps, etc. So anyway, let me give you a couple of these quotes as they're getting ready to cross over the river here.
And while you're looking there, the next thing I'm going to ask you about, 'cause somebody in the audience said it would be great to see a book about how the weather affected the civilians. Do you have any quotes from civilians about the weather? Because they're hunkered down in their basement.
Yeah. So there's a write-up in one of our focus pieces in the book, People's Stories Matters to Remember. That's especially poignant to me because it stopped me in my tracks. I'm gobbling up these quotes left and right, man. Just, and I found out that there was a guy who had a winery, had a farm, had a winery down at Front Royal. And he keeps weather records because farmers, weather's everything.
Yeah.
Except there's one thing more important, your family. And he's got a son in the 7th Virginia Cavalry. And so you want to talk about a quote. The day, bright and warm, but to me and my family, one of gloom and darkness. And now I'm beginning to wonder, right? What's going on here? About 1:00 p.m., I received a note from my brother William informing me that my dear, precious boy, Walter, had been wounded in the cavalry fight at Upperville on yesterday. I immediately got on my horse and started in that direction by way of Barry's Ferry. Very soon, the fatal truth was communicated to me, first by wounded soldiers returning, and a few miles further on in letters from cousins, Horace and Isaac. My firstborn son, my pride, had fallen by a shot fired from the enemy while making a charge for the protection of Chew's battery. So it wasn't weather that caused his death, but this guy was one of our civilian weather observers. And the last thing I expected to find was that comment.
Right. He throws that detail in.
Walter Buck and Dad is Marcus. And there's a great little quote we put in here. A Greek historian, in peace, sons bury their fathers. In war, fathers bury their sons.
Ugh.
And it's all too true, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So crossing the river. Let us cross over the river, huh? All right. Most people know Edward Porter Alexander. He looked pretty good in the movie, too, by the way.
Yeah.
That's another story. Let's see. But, it was another awful night. I was now back with my battalion, and we were marching all night in awful roads and mud and dark and hard rain. And though we had only 3 miles to go, we were some distance from the bridge at sunrise. The rain was now over and the sun rose clear. The whole night had been spent in groping and pulling through the mud, a few feet at a time, and then waiting for the vehicle in front of you to move again. And men would go to sleep on their horses or leaning in fence corners or standing in the mud. Private Louis Leon, 53rd North Carolina Infantry. The river was up to my chin and very swift. We crossed in fours for protection, as otherwise we could not have crossed. Our cartridge boxes we carried around our necks to keep the powder dry. On the south bank, tar was poured so that we would not slip back in the river as the mud was very slick. Jay Eagle of our company was stuck until some of the boys pulled him out. We went 6 miles further, and I honestly believe more of us were asleep on the night's march than awake.
When you're dragging ass out of bed and the hairs mussed up on your head, you picture the 20th Maine and you're happy once again. Fight the battle against being slow with little ground top, bro.
When you're dragging ass out of bed, the hair's mussed up on your head. You picture the 20th Maine, and you're happy once again. Fight the battle against being slow with little ground top, bro.
Addressing Gettysburg's Little Ground Top by Bantam Roasters is available at 82 Steinware Avenue in Gettysburg or at addressinggettysburg.com/cafe.
Sam Pickens. This guy provides some unbelievable quotes. We went to a ford several hundred yards higher up the river than where we crossed before. So if you go down to Williamsport and go down and look at the river, look up to the right. There's a little island there. It's up by that. Going up to the aqueduct through the water that smelt very offensively. As soon as we got near the river, we knew the men were waiting by yelling and howling that we heard. The Potomac being swollen was very wide and was over waist deep. We waded 2 by 2 by side, holding on to each other in order to resist the current better and be more steady. Our clothes, blankets, and haversacks all got wet, which increased our load and made it very disagreeable marching after crossing. The banks were muddy on the side, so steep and slippery that it was difficult to scuffle up. We were very tired and confidently expected to stop directly after getting over the river, but on we went without stopping. So there's just a couple of them there, Matt.
That's just so hard to imagine these guys doing that stuff. John, do you have any quotes that you like? I saw you were looking too. I don't want to.
Oh, John has a book here in front of me. He does, because in parts that John wrote in here, he wrote great ones.
No, I love everything Jeff has chosen, and I think he's captured. I mean, we've shown some quotes from the days of the battle, from that heat wave in June, and from the crossing of the Potomac there on July 13th. So, and I think those are really the best in terms of the expressing the extremes that these soldiers had to deal with during this 6-week campaign.
Yeah. All right. Let me go through here because some of the people had some good questions. I incorporated most of them into these, but here, a lot of people very interested in this subject. One person said something to the effect of, it goes to show you what a bunch of nerds we are that we find this to be very interesting. But it is very interesting. Let's see here. Think this is moving up on my to read soon book list rather fast. So somebody's bumping it up on his list. A couple of other people have already read it and they love the book.
Thank you.
I asked you that one there. Valerie says she loves the weather maps in the back of the book. One guy here, Peter, he says, I remember being overseas and being up for 36 hours straight in 140-degree weather and peeing syrup. Not good.
Yeah, no.
That's that dehydration there.
Yeah.
God damn. That sucks. Yeah, just a lot of positive comments in here. Everybody really loves the book. They're excited to read the book. Oh, I wanted to ask this too, and Peter asked this one as well. Going back to the records, we were talking about predicting the weather, right? Farmer's Almanac. What was the deal with that? I mean, was that like the closest thing? Did these reports get into that? And you know, what the hell is it? I mean, I know what it is, but where does it come from? And is it reliable?
Well, I have no idea whether these reports would have been in the almanac. The Farmer's Almanac is shrouded in mystery. Let me just say that on the television show that I currently am on, that Penn State produces, a couple decades ago, we did a feature on evaluating the weather forecast in the Farmer's Almanac, and they're not very good.
Okay. Were they the best thing going?
Let me give it to you another way.
Go ahead.
The three of us could get together over pizza and beer tonight, and with the goal of let's produce a weather forecast for every day for the remainder of 2026 for Gettysburg.
Okay.
And put together our experiences, our life experiences. We'll throw in a snowstorm here or there and a cold snap. And given that climate change, global warming is real, that things are a little warmer now than they were back then, well, we're gonna make it a hot summer, okay? Because that usually happens. Sure. It's gonna be humid in July in Gettysburg. We'll throw in some thunderstorms here and there. We'll come up with a reasonable scenario for the rest of 2026. Putting our three collective minds together, we could do a great job, right?
Sure.
There's really no science involved there.
Right.
It's just a
anecdotal
collective experience of three individuals.
Yeah.
Are we going to be right on some days?
Sure.
Darn right we are.
Yeah.
Are we going to be wrong on some days? Darn right we are. That's pretty much what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Yeah. And that's basically like my experience with the bike tours. Like I was really good at telling you if we were going to get rain or not. You know, customers would call and they'd be like, the forecast is calling for rain. And I would literally go outside and I'd look to the west and I go, when are they saying it's going to rain? And they're like, in an hour. And I go, no, not an hour. Probably this afternoon. And I was usually right.
But there's a difference. You're making a forecast, a short range forecast, based on lots and lots of experience of looking up at the sky where you are.
Yeah.
The Farmer's Almanac forecasts, they put that on paper a year in advance.
Mm-hmm. Based on last year, right?
Well, based on whatever, based on
many years.
Coming up with a reasonable scenario. So what you're doing is different because yours is a short range forecast that's based on kind of looking up at the sky.
Observation,
and the Farmer's Almanac forecast, that is printed a year in advance.
And is that for the whole country or is that
it's for the whole country.
Is it broken? I've never looked through one. Is it like broken up by region or?
Yeah, it's broken up by regions and usually by weeks, like the week of June, this to that will be this. So there's no way to make weather forecasts that far in advance.
No.
With any degree of accuracy that's anything better than guesswork.
Right.
Okay, that's the science.
Okay.
That's the science.
How about another listener had a question about drought. I mean, obviously we know it was raining after the battle. We had that heat wave before the battle in June. Did we get any rain in June?
Yeah, there's rain in there. In fact, one of the great quotes, and it's too long to read, Sergeant Wright again, I think it's on page 116 in the book. He's talking about the rain when they're crossing at Edwards Ferry. And that quote is fantastic. And he talks about, he compares it to Washington crossing to Delaware. The weather's different, right? But I mean, it's torrential rain they're crossing. It's as miserable as it can be. And he talks about if there was some artist that could capture this, it would really be something. And of course, nobody did. I'm still leaning on Dale, but you need a commission to get these things done. But
a line of thunderstorms ended the heat wave.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
And they had hail.
Late in the day on June 18th, we know that a line of thunderstorms, pretty ferocious thunderstorms, the weather observer at the Naval Observatory said that hail accompanied the thunderstorms, right? And we've all been in those situations, right? During the summer, like it's been hot and humid and you're just like, please, I could use some relief. And then a thunderstorm rolls in and the next day it's cooler and less humid and you're like, ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long will it last?
Yeah.
But it was funny because the soldiers were talking about that hail. And then, of course, we got the observatory report and there it is. It's like, it's nice when it dovetails.
So how bad was that heat wave? What were the high temperatures then?
Well, I think as I mentioned earlier, in Washington, D.C., during that 4-day period in June, the high temperature exceeded 93 degrees on 4 consecutive days.
That's right.
And and I think one of the days, I don't have the numbers in front of me, it got up to 98. So, and that kind of heat, a 4-day stretch in DC in June is not all that common even in modern day times, when we know that the climate is a little warmer than it was in the 1860s. So this was a significant heat wave in the middle of June.
So, and that's the shade temperature, right?
Yeah,
that you're talking there. So that's not including the heat index, which had to be over 100 degrees.
Heat index during the high heat index, I think, was 117, 118, something like that during that heat wave.
God.
That's our estimate.
That's shade.
That's in the shade.
So the rains come and break that heat wave. So God, could you imagine the battle being fought in that?
How about that?
You know, you'd have like 60% of them would be having heat stroke.
This is probably a good time to interject. In one of the appendices in the book, we attempt to, as best we can, using all the available data sources, tell you what the weather was like each day of the Gettysburg campaign in the vicinity of where the soldiers were. So we have that for all 42 days, I believe it is, from June 3rd to July 14th, maybe, where we try to give you a sense of, with a range of temperatures, recognizing that the armies were not all in the same place. And we think we know that's the first time that anyone has attempted to do this, to sort of paint the picture using the kinds of terminology we use on television today: partly cloudy, mostly sunny, thunderstorms, etc. We put that together in the appendix.
Okay.
Yeah, June 17th, 95 to 100 degrees, and heat index anywhere between 114 119. Hazy sun, very hot, oppressive. Yeah, June 18th is when the thunderstorms rolled in. So by the 19th, the temperature is 80 to 85 degrees, and it was cloudy, and no measurable heat index, I guess, that day. Max heat index 84 to 89.
How about wind? Was it windy or not so windy? It never really gets windy around here in the summer.
I think it's measured. It's measured at the observatory.
No, I know it's measured, but what was it during the battle?
Well, if when I was compiling that appendix, if I thought wind was a significant factor, I would have put it in that appendix.
Okay.
I don't think wind. There were some days. I mean, I could just pick up the book and look. There were some days when wind was mentioned quite frequently.
Soldiers mentioned wind sometimes. Yeah.
I mean, John, Jeff, in the summertime, there are some days you're dying for a breeze, right?
Yes, just give me a little bit.
It's like the doldrums around here. Like it's, yeah. But then in the winter, you go out on the battlefield and it cuts right through you. It's constant.
I've been on a little round top in dead of winter when the wind was blowing like 50, 60 miles an hour and the temperature was like 10 degrees.
Yeah.
I was on there for about 5 seconds.
Yeah, your eyes start watering and you got like chunks of ice right under your eyelids because it can't even get down your cheek before it freezes. Right. It's so bad. Go ahead, John.
I mean, lest we give the impression that the weather was extreme the whole time. I mean, June 7th, June 8th, the armies are still largely near Fredericksburg. Breezy, pleasant, chilly morning, comfortable. So there were some nights when the temperature dropped into the 40s early in June. That does happen, even in modern times. You'll have some days in early June, for example, where it's quite pleasant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So
now I'm trying to think of like the cannonade, for example, all that smoke. Somebody points out in the comments, the Bliss farm is still burning, smoldering, right? So you got all this smoke, cannons, the house, the farm buildings burning, the wood, whatever. And it's not, as I understand it, wasn't a very particularly windy day. No. And so it's just hanging there.
Yeah.
Like, God, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, that's summer in Gettysburg. Like, there's just no wind when you really need it. It's not going to clear smoke out of your lungs. It's not going to cool you off. It's just miserable.
Part of your color palette that you were talking about.
Yeah, that's right. I'll take that over what we're sitting through right now any day.
Amen.
Yeah, this is horrendous.
Yeah.
Guys, people can get the books just about anywhere. One of the places is For the Historian here in Gettysburg, which you've mentioned, or if you mention Addressing Gettysburg, you get a 20% discount. And but you can get it anywhere. Amazon, the Visitor Center, the Heritage Center, all over the place, right?
History Press.
What's that?
History Press.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Do you have any book signings in Gettysburg or any trips to Gettysburg planned in 2026?
Yes, a couple actually. We're going to be up there a few times. We're tentatively scheduled to do something with the Seminary Ridge Museum folks.
Good.
And we're also going to be there for a roundtable in May. And there may be some book signings going on. We got to look at each other's schedules and see what we can do while we're in town in any of the instances where we're there. And goodness knows if one of the major weather groups out there decides they want to do something on their books and wants us around Gettysburg during the summer with all the 250th thing going on of the nation's history. There's talk of such things. Who knows? We could be back for something like that.
Well,
got to come for the green screen.
I was going to say, when you know that you're coming, give me enough advance notice so that we can pull that together. I mean, we'd have to animate those maps, but we can figure that out. I know enough people. We can figure that out. That would be fun to do. And I think that would be really cool. People would get a kick out of that, seeing that weather like that. All right. This is an interesting question, and then we're going to let you guys go. Cheatham Hill again says, the question we all want to know, does the sulfur from the powder actually impact the weather in the immediate? I don't understand that question. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that the idea here is that some experimentation does go on to deposit particles into clouds at high altitudes to make them more apt to produce precipitation. And so the question probably deals with the idea that all this was going on down near the ground, and there were all these extra particles being added to the air. And the problem here is that where the particles are isn't where the clouds form. And the precipitation forms at very high altitudes. So the addition of all this smoke and sulfur and particles to the low-level air, all that really does is makes it hard to breathe.
Yeah, okay.
Down here near the ground, but it won't create weather on its own.
Got it.
It's high enough up, like with the fires coming out of Canada a couple years ago. I was on the battlefield, and
you could taste
was
it.
filtering some sunlight.
Right.
Yeah.
High enough up.
Wildfires on a massive scale can produce plenty of particles that rise high into the sky and then get blown into the United States. And that's what happened, as Jeff is referencing. And that can clearly have an impact on visibility.
Yeah. I remember there's a few times that's happened with California or Canadian wildfires. And I remember being able to look at the sun directly when it was lower in the sky, like towards sunset, late in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And I said to my friend, I'm like, dude, I'm staring right at the sun right now. And he goes, oh yeah, what the hell is that about? And then we realized I've had this like weird film on my tongue all day because I'm eating smoke from, then it was California. That was a few years ago. All right. Well, listen, guys, I love this, and I could probably talk about this with you for another 4 hours because this is such a fascinating topic. But we're all going to get the book. That's what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, right? We're going to get the book, Amazon, wherever you can, around town, all over the place. Told you can get your discount from For the Historian. And yeah, thank you guys very much for your time. I appreciate that. And
thank you for hosting us. Thanks to your viewers for their interest.
Really?
They are very interested in this. They're very interested in this. I'm like, another great interview. Well, that's more about me. Great interview. Again, that's about me again.
Well, you're an extra.
So thankful you did this. Okay, so they're all there. Thanks, Jeff and John. Fantastic work, and thank you both for your dedication to share your passion with the Gettys Nerds trademark. Thank you guys very much.
Welcome.
I really enjoyed this. Good luck to you with the book. And we'll see you when you come to town. And that's it for us, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, whatever you're doing. And we hope you enjoyed the interview. We hope you get the book and you learn something more about the Battle of Gettysburg via this work. Until next time, it'll be the meantime. Bye-bye. All right.